morning. My name is Adele Karoun, and I'm going to be discussing communicating with intention and clarity for the workplace and beyond. So this will have some tips for when you go into the workplace, if you're doing an internship or getting an office job or doing, a role that you haven't done so far while you've been a high school student. A little bit about my background, just so that you know where I have been in the workplace. I'm currently a regional outreach coordinator for DigiPenn Institute of Technology in Redmond, and we have degree programs in art and animation, game design, computer science, and computer engineering. And I perform outreach. So basically, when there is not a COVID situation, I go to high schools and college fairs and industry events to talk about our school. But during COVID, I'm doing more like email and online communications and Zoom calls. Prior to that, I was a practicing attorney in Nevada and California, and I did litigation and appellate law. So I've worked in small and mid-sized and large law firms. I've worked in education, government, and nonprofit settings. So today I'm just presenting on written communication, oral communication, and nonverbal communication, and also some on communication when you're in a conflict situation, like if you have a conflict with a boss or a roommate or a coworker. Okay, we can move to the next.
Are you ready for your slides?
Yeah, I'm ready for my slides.
All right, present. And 1 second while I get it all together. And then we go to the, all the other kids are really great at that. Here we go. Okay, you're there. I hope.
Okay.
No?
I'm not seeing it.
You see, I really tried. Share is top. Shared when did the, okay, we're almost there. Hang on, friends. Adele's like, that's why I didn't want you to do it.
No, it's okay.
There
we go. Okay. All right, and we can skip to the next slide. Okay, so I started with this slide just because I feel like this is a lot of what's going through our brains right now. I think in the world we're increasingly interconnected, and there are so many different ways to communicate, and it's tricky to keep up with everything. And I think a lot of times adults are telling people, telling people your age, put down your phones and you need to engage in person, but then there's a lot happening on our devices as well that we're responsible for. And so I just wanted to present a little bit more so that you can learn how to communicate, particularly in the workplace, but also as you go off to college and in other settings. Okay, so I'm going to start with email communication. We can go to the next slide. So starting with texting versus email. I think we all love texting, and the reason that people love texting is because it's short, it's to the point, and it's practical. And I think it also has a limited engagement. I think a lot of times people will text somebody when you just want to tell them something real quick, but you don't want to have a long conversation or spend a lot of time. So that's why we all like texting. But email, still has a role in the business place, particularly, but also in education. You can go to the next slide. So with texting, grammar's optional. We all use abbreviations and do things that make it faster. And a lot of times we're using voice recognition and just pushing that little microphone button and then sending our message off quickly. Next slide. So we all know that you know how to write a basic email, and I'm sure your teachers have probably talked to you a lot about this in school. I think all the way back to middle school, teachers talk about how to write email, but I think it took me a long time to learn how to write a good professional email. And so I just want to present a little bit on this because I think it's really important as you go into the workplace to have your written communications be a good representation of you. So starting with the subject, you want to make the subject a concise statement of what the email is about and check the spelling, obviously, in your subject line. And I know that sounds like very simple, but I get emails all the time from high school students where even like the subject line has something misspelled. So always double check your subject line and check that you aren't just hitting reply. If you're writing about something new that was not in the last email, be sure that you change the title of your email, because then when someone goes to search for it, they actually find the right email that's about, that it is on topic. We can go to the next slide. Beginning a professional email, it's really good to start with a greeting instead of launching right into your message. And obviously this doesn't always apply. So for example, if your boss just says, where is the file on such and such, you can just say it's here. But generally, if you're writing an email to someone, you want to start with hello in their name or good morning in their name. And this is just, to be more personable and to show that you're open and that it's more of like a conversation in your email, to be more conversational. And when you're looking at what name you should put at the beginning of your email, if you haven't met them in person, or if it's someone in the workplace who is your superior or supervisor, a customer or client, you want to begin with a formal title like Mr., Ms., Dr., Miss. And the exception is if you don't know what gender they are, or if you don't know their name or something like that, then depending on the context, you could just leave the name off and just say good morning, and not include a name, or include first name if you're on a first name basis. But with emailing professors while you are at college, be sure you're always, if they have their PhD, always addressing them as doctor. And this is really, really important. A lot of them have gone to school for 5 to 7 years, sometimes 9 or 10 years to get their PhD. And I have a lot of friends who are academics, and like nothing irks them more than an email addressed to like Mr. or Ms. or Mrs. Particularly younger professors get a lot of this, and it bothers them because they want to be treated with respect for the degrees that they've received. Okay, next slide. And a quick note on Miss, Ms., and Mrs. I think it seems like everybody knows this, but whenever I'm walking around schools, I hear people calling everybody Miss, and it's a real issue. So you want to be sure that when in doubt, you're addressing people as Ms., and particularly in writing, because Miss is historically for an unmarried woman, and Mrs. is, was a greeting for a married woman who adopted her husband's name. And the situation now is that usually or always you don't know. So even if someone is wearing a wedding ring or they mention their spouse, you don't necessarily know that they took their spouse's name. And so if they didn't, then Mrs. would not be proper. So this is really important to professional women especially, so try to just use Ms. if you're not sure. Okay, next slide. Email body. Your email should contain a clear and concise message. So you want to think about what you're going to write before you start typing, and mentally categorize the email. Think about, is it requesting information or feedback, or is it providing something like information or an attachment? You want to be sure this is clear in the beginning of the email, and if it's a longer email, reiterate it at the end so that you're sure that your email accomplishes what you need it to accomplish. Next slide. Email organization. Just because it's an email, it doesn't mean that you don't want to use good organization, grammar, and proper paragraphs. But with emails, you really want to try to keep it organized and keep it very brief, because a lot of times I think we're used to writing personal emails that are longer and more in a paragraph or a prose form. And when you get into the business place, people will lose track of what you're saying if you have too many thoughts in your email. So it's okay to break things down into A, B, and C, or number them 1, 2, and 3, or even bullet point them, so that your reader, if you're asking for a response to 3 different things, if you're asking your boss for 3 things, you want to be sure that you get everything that you need, and the best way to do that is to not write like a long paragraph.
Okay, just screwed up. Hold on.
Okay.
I touched the thing wrong. Coming back. I apologize. There we go.
Okay, so the next slide is proofread carefully. And we all know that we should proofread emails, and somehow, mistakes still go out. So just be sure to remember that every communication or email or memo is a representation of you and your institution or business or office, and also your school. Like if you send out sloppy emails at work, if you have an internship somewhere, people will go like, oh, I guess they're not teaching writing at this school. Like people will make comments even though it's totally inappropriate, and everyone makes mistakes or typos now and then. And so, but people are sometimes judgmental about young people in the workplace and interns and stuff like that. So you just want to be really careful that you proofread everything as much as you can. Slowly read the subject, the attachment title, and be sure if you mentioned an attachment that you have the correct attachment. I think we've all done it where we say attached is the whatever, and then we forget to attach it. So be sure that you just slow down when you're sending emails for work. And also, if you are able to read out loud, this is always a good tip just for proofreading generally. When you're reading on your screen, sometimes you just glance over things and you don't notice them as much, but once you read out loud, you might notice if there's something that's worded a little bit strangely and you want to change it. And then ending an email, This is something that I've learned over time. You really want to close your email with something courteous and friendly, and usually you want to have some kind of invitation to engage in further conversation. And the reason why is you want to think of the email as a process. It's like in the context of your relationship with whoever you're writing an email to. It's not just to get out information. I think we all think of our inbox full of things to do, and we just kind of want to like respond to things and get it all done. But you really want to be sure that you're conveying like the tone and the message, that you're being helpful, and that it's part of an ongoing communication with that person. So the next slide, we have, these are just some examples of ways you can end an email. So like, have a good or great day or weekend, see you soon, thank you for your help, I'm looking forward to meeting with you. You can put, if you're going to meet with them, I'll see you on Tuesday at 3 o'clock, or I'll see you at this time. In the meantime, let me know if I can do anything to help. Things like that. And it sounds like small talk, or it sounds just like a formality to do this, but it's really important because I think sometimes in writing we all come across as a little bit more terse and brief or to the point, and you want to be sure that you're seeming open and helpful, and like particularly if it's to a customer or a client, but also to any of your coworkers, you want to seem like you're there and you're ready to help, and that you're a friendly and nice person. I included a little bit here on work messaging. This is sort of a new thing in the workplace. You can go to the next slide. Or not necessarily new, but more and more offices are using them, like offices of all types are using things like Slack or Microsoft Teams chat or Skype for Business. And it's similar to texting at the office. So it's a great thing when you want to just send a message that says, hey, can we meet at this time? Or where is this document? Or something like that. You can use messaging at work. If you go to the next slide, I have a few do's and don'ts. Do use messaging for short things, like are you available to answer a few questions? Do use it to send a message for something that you don't need a record of. And do keep it work related. It depends on the workplace. Like some workplaces, my workplace is a little bit more social, and people will send things like recipes or, you know, just more like personal things, like a picture of their pets or something like that sometimes. But generally, you want it to be something that you're comfortable with your boss or with anybody in the company seeing. So just keep that in mind. Don't put dates and times that you plan to call or meet in messages unless it's like, we're meeting in 15 minutes. But that's just because sometimes people will send me things like that on Slack, and then a week later I'm like, where were we meeting? What were we doing? And you have to go and try to find it through this giant list of messages. So don't put things like that in messages. And then don't mistake messaging for like social media or texting. You know, just keep it businessy. And part of the reason for this, like I worked in legal environments, but if ever there is like a lawsuit or any kind of controversy or something that happens in your workplace, sometimes they need to find all written materials, like anything in writing between certain people or, you know, things like that can come up. And it is just a nightmare for the people working there to go through, to sift through like thousands of things like, what do you want from Starbucks, you know? So try to not put like too much extra stuff that you don't need to in office chat or in office email. And then also don't complain about your coworkers or boss ever, even if you think it's a personal message, because it's just like texting. The older you get, the more stories you hear of people who say like, oh my gosh, I said this thing and it went. Sometimes things end up like accidentally going to the wrong group, or they get forwarded, or people misunderstand things. So you want to just be sure that you're not doing that in writing on messaging, even if you think it's to your friend. So moving into phone etiquette, I just have one quick slide on this. Probably your workplace will have advice if you are answering the phone, even if you're not a receptionist or a person who normally answers the phone. A lot of times, you know, just if people aren't in the office, you'll need to answer the phone, and you need to know how to transfer calls or, you know, handle phone calls. So always try to just say like, can I put you on a brief hold, or can you hold for just a minute instead of just hold or please hold. I think we've all had to deal with that if you call a doctor's office or something. And then if you don't know the answer, consider just asking to return the phone call so that you can find it, so that you don't keep people waiting for too long. And finally, set up your voicemail. I call students a lot, and a lot of these are, you know, I'm not like a telemarketer. I'm calling students who have applied to and been accepted to our school, and a lot of them don't set up their voicemail. And like, So at work and on your cell phone, try to set up your voicemail, and just keep in mind, I know you get robocalls and stuff like that, but it's good to have it set up in case someone wants to call and leave you a message that they can't text you or that they don't want to like need to write a separate email to you for. Okay, so moving on to meeting etiquette. You can go to the next one. I call this staff meetings the good, the bad, and the boring. Once you're out in the workplace, you will have lots of meetings and trainings. And so here are a few tips. Try to focus on the meeting. Don't multitask and do other work while you're in a training and a meeting. And it's not only because it's disrespectful to whoever is speaking, because sometimes they can't see if you're on your laptop and you're doing something they can't see, but it gives the impression to everybody in the room that you don't care. And this used to happen to me a lot as a lawyer. We would go to these continuing legal education like CLE classes, and people all around me would just be sitting there doing their work. And sometimes like the seminar was pretty interesting, or you're learning things, you're there because you're supposed to be learning, and people would just be sitting there doing work. And so it also, your impression is important to everybody who you're interacting with in the professional world. And you just want to remain professional, and part of that is not multitasking when you're in meetings. And also consider handwritten notes or a tablet instead of a laptop. It's easier, I know, to have your meeting notes all typed up, but when you don't have a laptop open, first of all, handwriting, you don't transcribe, you don't write everything they say, you more organize your notes and write down the important things when you're handwriting. Lots of studies have shown this, and a lot of times you remember them better by handwriting them. And also it keeps more engagement between you and the speaker at the front of the room. Like if someone is teaching on a particular topic, they'll feel more like their audience is engaged and listening to them if they don't have that extra screen of a room full of laptops looking back at them. And then if you have an idea or you remember something you need to do, or even if you're in a staff meeting and your boss says something about an email and you're like, oh, I forgot to do that, just jot it down for later, or set an alarm on your phone so that you go back to it later, but you're not doing it actually in the meeting, because then you might miss the next thing, which I think like everybody does that from time to time, but you don't want to be in that position of saying, oh, sorry, I wasn't paying attention because I got distracted by something. And then also only ask questions that are really helpful to the whole group. If it's something that only applies to you and it's your independent issue, or that's better to save for a follow-up question with the speaker after the meeting, or a follow-up email if you can. And that's just, since I called it the good, the bad, and the boring, that's something to keep it from getting boring and extra long for everybody else, if people can just keep their questions brief and do them later. Okay, moving into nonverbal communication. We all know that nonverbal communication matters. So if we say we're excited to work on a new project, but then we look bored or tired in the meeting, things like that, then team members don't really believe you and people don't necessarily approach you the next time. So you need to be really careful with things like wearing headphones, and that's even if you have a really boring job. Like I had jobs in high school where like they would tell me it was going to be one thing and then it would end up being like filing in practically like a garage or a warehouse. So, I mean, even if you're doing really boring things, try to keep headphones to a minimum. And it's just because you're more open to other people. People will come in there and maybe like talk to you if you're not wearing headphones. And then you might get more of the experience that you want to have, even though they're giving you boring work to begin with that you could do with music on or something. And so try to minimize like wearing headphones or closing your door if you have a door, and just being, try to be reasonably friendly in break rooms. I know some people are more introverts and other people are more extroverts, but just if you are more like physically present and you kind of like mingle just a little bit, it's going to help you get a better experience out of your internship or your summer job or your job during the school year. So I call this next section, eye contact, is it good or is it creepy? And so I think it's tough for a lot of people. We're told to make eye contact since we're kids, and people say, look at me when I'm talking, but not everybody feels comfortable with it, and it causes some people anxiety, and some people don't like it when other people make eye contact with them because it just feels like they're staring at them. So I gathered some information on how to deal with this issue. And I think it comes off a lot, especially with like job interviews and stuff. You're trying to figure out how much to look at the people who you're talking to. So with the old school rules of eye contact, I included this little picture of these guys staring at each other. People used to emphasize eye contact demonstrates strength or confidence or honesty, And if you don't make eye contact, or you don't, use enough eye contact, that either you're not paying attention, or you're insecure, or you're shifty, or something. And now I think there's more awareness that some people just struggle with this more than other people do. But generally, you want to, at a minimum, just try to make eye contact before you start talking to somebody and at the very beginning of the conversation. And these are some other tips. When you look away, do it slowly, don't look down, and then try to just look at another spot on their face if you don't really like making eye contact. And you can break your gaze with a gesture or a nod or or something like that, yes. And that way you still show that you're listening even if you're not maintaining eye contact. So this is just another picture of that, just to show that you're ready to listen with eye contact. And then studies have shown the optimal eye contact is 3.3 seconds, and it varied by, I think, half a second either way. And to try to have eye contact about 50 to 70% of the time, but it doesn't mean necessarily eye contact with their whole face. You can think of the face as like an upside down triangle, like that. And so you can look anywhere on their face, and it still will come across as eye contact to the other person. And if you're talking to a group of people, if you're doing like a group interview, it's good to make eye contact with one person, particularly if that person asks you a question, but then try to shift your gaze to the other people as well. All right, so now I'm going to move into communicating when things are difficult. So I'm going to start with roommate conflicts. My boss at work now actually was in housing, and she was an RA, and so she worked with a lot of these issues for a long time. So she gave me some tips on this particular section. So she said to try to avoid a conflict in the first place. So with housing match questionnaires, if you're going away to college and you get one of these questionnaires that says, it will have a bunch of questions. How late do you like to stay up at night? Are you quiet or loud? Are you clean or messy? Be honest. And I think I know I made this mistake when I went to college. I was afraid to say I was messy because I thought, then they'll put me with someone who's even more messy and it'll just be like a disaster. So I was looking at the outcome instead of just answering honestly, and I should have just been honest because it caused a lot of difficulty for me. And same with my boss was saying, she said she was quiet, and it was because she didn't want to end up in some kind of a party dorm or with a really loud roommate who blared music all the time or something, but she actually is like not quiet at all. She's very social. And so she got this roommate who just did not talk, and it was really like not good for her at all. And so she ended up switching roommates. So you want to be sure that you're honest and that you're not just trying to get a certain outcome when you fill out these questionnaires. But if there is not a contract system at your college, a lot of places, they have a contract where you go over things like visitors or cleaning or things like that. You want to try to just have these discussions with your roommates early. There are a lot of sample questions on the internet that you can discuss with a new roommate, and it might seem uncomfortable to try to have that conversation and to just say, can we talk about a few of these things? But it's going to be better to just do that early instead of to deal with it as the weird things start coming up. So moving on to the next slide, a lot of the potential roommate conflicts, a lot of them, it should be on, can you go back one slide?
Yep. Well, I thought it could. Whoops, up. Gee.
It should say potential roommate conflicts. I'll just keep talking and we'll get there eventually. Go back one more, I think. There we go. Oh, wait. Next one. There we go. Dishes. So reach an agreement on dishes. How often will you wash? Will you use each other's dishes or not? Even if yours are dirty, can you use their dishes? Talk about those things. Set a system for cleaning old food out of the fridge. It sounds silly, but it's really important. And then talk about guests and visitors or romantic partners. It won't apply if you're in a dorm with like 2 single beds and no extra space. But if you're in an apartment or like apartment style living on campus, you want to talk about things like, clearing it if somebody has a guest or if someone's, if someone has a friend from home who's coming over to stay with them or something like that. You want to just be sure that you set some ground rules for asking in advance and boundaries. And you want to be sure that person does not turn into an extra roommate and stay longer than you expected. And if you just show extra consideration consideration with your roommate on these things, they'll probably extend the same to you. So even if you know, like it's Friday night and they're not doing anything except watching TV, but you're going to have a friend over, just be like, oh, hey, is it all right if my friend, comes over or something? And that way, like, they'll probably do the same for you when their friends are coming over. So moving on to communication, if there is a roommate conflict. If you're at college and there is an RA, a resident advisor, speak to your RA because they've been through a lot of training, and you want to talk to them before small issues become a big issue, and they can give you advice on how to deal with a particular situation. If there's no RA involved, you can try these things. Don't raise the issue when you're angry, even if it's like they didn't wash the dishes for so long that there's like mold on them. You don't want to deal with it right when you're like dealing with that situation of the dishes. Deal with it later and say, this happened, and talk about it when you're in a more neutral space. Sit down if you can, if you're both sitting or even if you're both standing, but communication is better if you're all at the same level. And try to use I statements. I'm going to go through what that is in a second, and be emotionally aware. Like, try to figure out if you're just having an emotional or angry response and how to deal with it very rationally and logically. So the next slide just shows just these tips for assertive communication, and these are the I statements, like I feel blank when you blank because blank, and I would like blank to offer a solution. And it just keeps things productive so that you're working towards a solution to the problem instead of just venting or complaining to somebody. So emotional intelligence. Before getting into communications on disagreements at work, I just want to cover a little bit on emotional intelligence and self-management strategies. I think when we have a conflict at work or we disagree with a boss or a coworker, it can get blown up into a much bigger thing for a variety of reasons. And some of these can be dealt with if you're just more emotionally aware of how you're feeling and if you have some good self-management tools. So it's not just a simple like think before you speak, but these tips go along those lines, and basically it's just a little bit more about managing your thoughts and your emotions and communicating effectively. So these are all from this book. So it's from Emotional Intelligence 2.0, and there are a lot of books on emotional intelligence, and I won't get into everything that is in them here. And I'm not a therapist. I'll give the disclaimer, I'm not a therapist or a counselor or anything like that, but this is just from some books that I've read. But a few tips to help you manage your own emotions. To get, better personal competence, you need self-awareness and self-management. And I think for high school students particularly, I think the most relevant thing is going to be working on self-management strategies. So a few of these tips are breathe right. Like if you are going through something really stressful, even if you're stuck in traffic or something like that, you want to try that. I'm sure you probably have all heard this trick, but if you like breathe in and then for like 5 seconds and hold it for 5 seconds and breathe out for 6 seconds, if you do that breathing technique, it actually will slow your heart rate and it helps you remain more calm. So if you're feeling really stressed out at work, be sure that you are breathing. It's good to create an emotion versus reason list just to be sure you're not acting emotionally rather than rationally. The next tip is to count to 10. And we all know this from like preschool. They tell you these things, take a deep breath and count to 10 on like Daniel Tiger or Sesame Street and things like that. But you want to be sure that you're taking a deep breath, or even like take a drink of water before speaking if something is really upsetting you, particularly at work. You want to have a few seconds to organize your thoughts so that you say something that comes out more clear and more reasonable if you're feeling upset. A good tip is, obviously to sleep on things. If you're making a big decision, take that extra day or week or month to help you think through it and get the clarity that you need. Set aside some time in your day for problem solving, whether that's the morning or the afternoon. Sometimes before the end of the workday is a good time to just sit down and, work out your to-do list for the next day and think through some problem solving kinds of things. Visualize yourself succeeding and take control of your self-talk. Clean up your sleep hygiene, some tips on that. Try to get 20 minutes of morning sunlight. Try to turn off your computer 2 hours before bedtime. I know this is really hard for all of us, but it's really good for it improves your sleep. Keep your bed for sleeping instead of studying in your bed, because that makes you get more worried about school and your work when you are trying to sleep. And avoid caffeine, especially in the afternoon. And then focus your attention on your freedoms rather than your limitations. And so I think this is a big one. Like, I had a lot of jobs that were disappointing to me when I was in college, where I thought I was going to be doing one thing and it turned out to be something else. So you want to be sure that you focus on, okay, maybe this job isn't what I thought it was going to be, or I'm not getting to do what I thought I was going to do in this role, but focus on your freedoms too. Like, realize you're in an environment and there are other people there. And so you can talk to people and you can ask people questions, or maybe you can mention to people at work your interests, and people will offer you more opportunities to learn about those things. So keep that in mind. And sometimes it's good to talk to someone who's not emotionally invested in the situation, but not a bunch of people. Just whine and pick someone truly uninvolved, like someone who doesn't work with you. And then be sure you're putting mental recharge into your schedule, and accept that change is just around the corner. Whatever situation you're going through at work, you probably will be out of it soon enough, because things change pretty quickly in the workplace. So just a couple quick slides on conflicts with your boss. We're almost out of time. If you have a problem with your boss, you want to think through self-management strategies like we just talked about. Those tips will really go a long way in helping you manage a situation or a disagreement, even if you're in a situation where you don't feel valued at work or you're not feeling respected. And I think really trying to work on those self-management things can keep you from quitting a job unnecessarily or being asked to leave a job if it's a really bad situation. So first, go through self-management strategies, and then decide if the problem or disagreement really matters, or if it's just something that's like bothering you or annoying you, but if it's something that you can tolerate and maybe wait out. But if it's something that really matters, then for work, it's a little bit different from the roommate situation. You want to be sure that you can use I statements sometimes, but business consultants have advised that it's helpful not as much to use the I statements at work, but instead to focus on your team or your group or your role or your department. And the reason why is that at work, it's not as much about how you're feeling, and people can be a little bit bothered by this. So for example, like if you say, when you critiqued my work on that particular project and told me, what I needed to do, it made me feel like I was unappreciated, or it made me feel like I didn't do a good job, and if you could please provide me with more constructive feedback. I don't know, I'm trying to think of an example when that would happen at work, but if you're saying something like that, it might be totally true, but if someone is your superior at work, they're going to think, well, I'm sorry that you feel that way, but I really just need you to do this thing this particular way, or I'm just asking you to do it correctly. And so the better thing to do is, if you're having an issue at work, to try to focus on what's best for your team and what's most efficient and productive for your department or for your particular role. And so if you focus on those things when you're speaking to a superior at work or to a coworker, it probably will help things go over better. And then people know that you're not just being selfish or being overly concerned about how you're feeling about work, but they'll know that you're just really trying to do your best job and to try to make work the best that it can be. Okay, so that is all that I have. Does anyone have any questions?
We have one in chat.
Okay.
Hold on, I do have some questions.
Oh, you do? Okay.
One question about, if I'm uncomfortable talking on the phone, is it still considered professional to email back if an employer calls and leaves a message?
Maybe. It depends on what the message is. If they're calling to set up an interview or something like that, I would say try to work on the phone skills. And I'm not sure the best advice for getting better at that, but I completely understand. And particularly when I was younger, I used to get nervous just calling to order a pizza. Like, I was very, very uncomfortable with the phone, and it's something that I think people get through and get past by doing it more. And yeah, I guess my best advice would be to try to use the phone a little bit more, to sort of force yourself to do it, because then you'll develop those skills. But I think it might be okay to email them back if it's something like they're just calling to set up an interview and they say, are you available Tuesday at 4? And if you email them back for that first time and say Tuesday at 4 works for me, I think that would probably be fine, because it's just like a very transactional thing. But sometimes I found, like, if it's an employer who calls you and you call them back, then I found a lot of times people will ask you questions. They'll say, oh, well, I'm wondering about your resume, or they might even say, can you work these particular hours? They might want to start asking you questions right when they talk to you about setting up the interview. And so that's why talking to them on the phone might be a little bit better for the communication rather than emailing people.
I have another question about how can I avoid or prevent talking at the same time as someone else or talking over another person in meetings, especially online with multiple people on the call. Any advice for that?
That is really hard. I saw a really funny meme about that the other day, that it was just like the never-ending Zoom meeting of people saying, like, oh, no, I'm sorry, you go ahead. No, I'm sorry, you go ahead. So I think we're all dealing with that right now when we have team meetings. Yeah, the only thing I can suggest with that, if it's a Zoom call, if it's, something structured, I think having an agenda helps. So if you are working on a team project or something like that, set it up so that each person has an opportunity to talk. That can help. Depending on what platform you're using, if it's an online thing, I think some of them have like the hand raising thing, or the chat box. I found the chat box works pretty well. If you have like a question, but you don't want to interrupt someone speaking and you can't really get in there, if you put your question in the chat box, then a lot of times someone will say, oh, there was a question, this from Adele, and then they'll let you talk or they'll address your question. So that's another way to try to work through that online. And then with in person, I would say just like try to wait until there's a pause and then try to get your question in. But I know that can be tough.
Adele, that's really great. That's all the questions I have here, unless anybody else wants to type in a question. Anybody else thinking of something that they're thinking I really want to have it? So someone's asking about the I statements. Is there a book? I mean, I'm actually an RA. I'm like an old RA, and I remember we went to so much freaking training about that. That's so amazing. But where is there some origination where somebody could study about that besides your counselor? I'm trying to.
I actually don't know. I got that feedback, from my supervisor who was an RA, and she suggested it, and I just went online. I think the website, actually, that one slide on that, I don't have it open anymore, but the slide on that, I think it might have had like what website it was from. I think she had more on that website, so that might be a place to look at that, or just if you just Google like I statements, you'll probably find some things from different counselors and people talking about that. But I think that's generally used. I think a lot of counselors and therapists use that even in like marriage counseling or like any kind of conflict situation. It really helps to just keep things like solution oriented. Oh,
it's called active listening. It goes with active listening training.
Okay.
So when I hear what I heard you said, this is also part of it. Like they go.
So, I don't have anything else on that, but okay.
That's all the questions I have right now. I really appreciate your time.
Okay,
and thank you
for
coming.
All right, thank you.